definitely need to go check out this channel for sure. This is China Insider with David Zhang. And before we bring him in here, I want to give a little quick introduction to his channel. He does some amazing commentary on what's going on over in China with the CCP. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and what's happening there. Great commentary on contemporary things that are happening with that situation. Also, issues with Taiwan. Of course, there's always contention with Japan, so those stories come up as well. It really sparks my interest because of, well, you guys all know my lineage and family and all that stuff over there. So this is big excitement. I've been following his channel for a good amount of time. I encourage you all to go over and subscribe. But without any further ado, I'd love to welcome to the show David Zhang. David Zhang, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clyde.
Absolutely. You've been doing a bang-up job, and I've been really, really impressed with your work on your channel, getting news to a lot of us out here. We get news from our usual mainstream media sources, don't have a lot of inside scoop on what's happening in China, especially if you try to get news from official sources. You're going to get basically what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to hear. And it's refreshing to hear a voice from people who have an inside scoop on what's going on there. How did you get started with all of this? And how did we get to this point right now where we're at?
Yeah, Clyde, I started working at a news station called the Epoch Times during the pandemic, really. And then about a year and a half later, I started doing this myself. So back then, when I was at the Epoch Times, I had a channel, same name, called China Insider. And I just basically took the name after and I continued to do it. And it really stems from a passion of mine, I guess you could say, because my personal experience, I grew up in China. I'm actually from Canada as well. So I grew up in Canada, but it was also always kind of stuck with me. What was going on in China needed to be clarified to everybody around the world, because clearly we've been poisoned by their narrative for many years through, you know, the whole economic power and all coercion, all these things. And so it kind of clicked naturally for me, given the fact that we were, you know, still in this pandemic and we still had no idea what was going on, you know, what was happening in Wuhan back in the days. And so it kind of became the spark for me to start this, because I think it's a place where it's a lot of information and a lot of truth is missing. So that's kind of how I got started.
Oh, amazing. I didn't know you were actually with the Epoch Times. I'm going to be honest. I'm very bad at not reading the author's name when I go through articles. I just go through the content and I see that. So my bad if I've probably read a bunch of your articles over the years. But yeah, so I wanted to get to the main crux of basically the way a lot of people see the whole China-Canada relation thing. I know a lot of people, they're upset with, obviously there's corruption, there's a lot of issues, and we can get into all those issues that are happening here in Canada because of the Chinese Communist Party. But it seems that every time you bring it up, the narrative is to say, oh, you said something about China, you're racist. And people really need to make a hard stop. We're not talking about China. When we say China, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. We're talking about the government of China, and we're criticizing that, not criticizing people of China. I feel sorry for the people of China. I feel sorry for them going back decades since the 50s, and having to go through Mao's his revolution and everything that's happened in China ever since, all the way to today, and it's still not great for Chinese people. So I mean, there's a clear delineation. Like, how do I even set the stage for this? How do we delineate between when we're criticizing China, the government, and delineating it from the people?
Great question. It's very easy, in my opinion, because China's long history and its culture has been rooted in this connection to whether that's to the divine beings, to the various historical figures. It's one of the longest, I guess you say, culture in the world, right? And the CCP has only existed for 100 plus years, and so it's really a very small fraction of what represents people from China. And so what that's precisely what the CCP wants to erase as well, because if you think about it, they generate this sense, right? You need to rely on the communists to survive. In other words, if you don't have us, how can you live on? It's they try to erase this idea that dynasties can go on, that presidents can be replaced, elections can happen, whatever form of choice that people have. They say that we are irreplaceable. And by creating this sense of reliance, you really just sever that connection, or even that trust, to our history. And so by doing that, you're erasing the line between the Chinese people, the government, and the party. And so I always tell people, the people of China, they never should be represented by a Western concept. And that, I mean, it's a European ideology that really destroyed Europe in the 20th century. And so why should that be what defines China and what defines the Chinese people in the 21st century?
Yeah, well, it's sad that Europe gets the rap for one guy with a god complex that made a meme. This poor economic policy called socialism, and it's wreaked havoc on the planet. And in every culture that it's been adopted, it's wreaked havoc. We saw it in the Soviet Union. We saw it with China, with under Mao. We saw it with Venezuela, even in recent times, in Cuba. It's been horrible everywhere it's been implemented. And I mean, we don't need to prove this anymore. I don't know why we have to have these discussions over and over again. I mean, you could just look at Korea from space, and it's a perfect example. You have one culture, a monoculture of Koreans. You split it right down the middle. You say, okay, you guys are free market capitalists. You guys are socialists. And we'll see how this goes. 80 years later, you can't even see North Korea at night from space. It's ridiculous. It really is. It really is that cut and dry. But yet we still keep trying to run this crazy experiment. And every time, and as I was getting into in my little epilogue before bringing you on, was this idea that you can run a socialist experiment in a free society, but there's only, anytime a socialist government takes place, you don't have the freedom to try a free market economy unless they choose to do so. And this happened in China. They had the 4 economic sectors that opened up. I believe it was late 70s, early 80s, was it?
Yeah.
And that led to a giant economic boom, but then it also led to corruption, like mass corruption in China, and a lot of people who had these promises of the socialist paradise, the great thing, that the utopia that was supposed to come, they were all shut down when they went to protest to get that. And this is a curious thing that I wanted to ask you, because obviously you lived in China, you've lived in Canada, so you can see the Western side of it, you can see the Eastern side of it. But I've come to learn that Chinese people don't believe that the Tiananmen Square events took place because of propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party. What is the prevailing viewpoint there?
Right. I would say 6 out of 10 people you ask in China would say that nothing. Well, they wouldn't say that nothing happened, but they would pretend like nothing happened, because it's one of the I would say one of the 5 unspoken. I guess you would say there's nothing that happened that day sort of events in China. It's one of the 5. So the reason why people do this, right? Because clearly things happened that night. We have footage. We have of the Tiananmen Square massacre. You see the students running. You see, there's blood everywhere. There's tanks rolling down. So how could you erase that from people's memory? It was so shocking to that night of people across China that people are just they're unwilling to comprehend that this actually took place. And
Wow.
of course, there's the whole propaganda aspect to it. One of the biggest outcome of the night was also the fact that it marked the end of the lingering press freedom that China still had in its state-controlled media environment. It was said that the media freedom died the night that the students also died. So it also marked the what you mentioned, Clyde, when you transition from the traditional, so to speak, the socialist construction of running China to that more of a mix between planned economy and capitalism, people thought that by shutting up and just making money, making mad amounts of money, that they will be further away from political persecution and avoiding threat to themselves. Just continue to make money, and that largely, generated what basically known as the massive corruption we're seeing too. But that was the mindset for a lot of people. They shut down that ideological um, part of their brain to say that we're just going to be materialistic, and the more materialistic we are, the safer we are. And so that really transitioned from the Mao's terror way of ruling to more of I guess you would say you're tranquilized in a sense, right? Uh, Through the materialist consumption of China's economy. And so now today, obviously, most younger people, they're never learning about the Tiananmen Square massacre or whatever happened since. But there are some moments where, for example, on June 4th each year, it's particularly sensitive in China. If you do anything like posting an image of a tank, you get censored, or anything referencing the day, it gets you censored. But people start to learn about these things. And so more people discover the forbidden part of history in China as they grow older. And so I would say, maybe like 10% of Chinese people still know what happened.
Some people just don't realize how restrictive China actually is for the average people that live there. Um, I understand that they have the Great Chinese Firewall, they call it. And it's, everybody knows the Great Chinese Wall, the Great Wall of China. But the Great Chinese Firewall is now this this thing that stops Chinese people from seeing the greater internet, seeing what's actually out there, and they're subject to this, and they're not allowed to use VPNs. Now, I've heard from places that there's actually punishments if you're caught using a VPN. What kind of punishment would you get for that?
It really depends. It's a double standard too, because all these officials, they use VPN to browse like Western sites all the time, and they don't get punished. But if you are somebody who offends, for example, by posting on Twitter or something offensive, I think it lands you a fine, maybe even 15 days in jail. I haven't heard many stories of people getting severe punishments for it. But I do hear cases of people in subways in Chinese cities, like cops will come in, they check your phones for things like forbidden apps or VPNs and that sort of thing. But still, it's become a culture to use VPNs simply because it's it's really started about early, maybe 2005, 2006, when people started to break through the firewall. I mean, the thing here is once you get access to outside information, once you hear free sources of information, you can never go back. You get this desire. So a lot of people continue to use it one way or another.
That's an interesting aspect of it I hadn't considered. So, because I know that there's this like technocratic move from China to gain control of their people. I mean, people over here, they think, oh, it'll never happen. We never see that. You better believe it'll happen if you let it. If you let it happen, they'll take that kind of control. But so yeah, tell me about this. How is it for the average person? Because I know like people like me, and I go on YouTube and I have to dance around words in order to not get censored on YouTube. We all get this. You can't say certain things on Facebook. You can't say certain things on, well, now Twitter's a little bit freer, but you can still get shadow banned on Twitter. This is like back in, it's hardwired into the website now because of years of what was going on there. But in China, it's more open. It's more they're more open about it. You said that there's double standards. I mean, if it wasn't for double standards, I don't think socialists would have any standards. But that's just a way of looking at it. But there's always going to be people that strive and want to be free. That's always going to be an aspect of life. No, we're not caged animals. That's not in our nature as human beings, and we won't take that if we know that there's an option. So you're saying that people are getting word from outside, and then they'll risk punishment to use VPNs just to get information. What are they doing with this information when they get it?
It's very interesting. There are many avenues. I'll just give you a few examples that I know of. One of them is they would share, uh, for example, people live in the United States, they do like a Chinese talk show, sort of political talk show commentary, and they'll get the video, they'll download it, bring it into China, spread it around WeChat groups. Each of these groups could range from 10,000 people. Some of them are much bigger, some are smaller. Those get spread around like wildfire. So you get to listen to a lot of the free information. Another one is there was a guy named Program Thing. That's his online name. He, for the longest time until his arrest, was doing this guerrilla campaign, evading internet censors, evading internet police to create this online Wikipedia for Chinese people to access things like VPN, important reads, like books, sources, and all these things, search engines, everything. He had this online system. And then after, I think like evading the police for 20 years, they finally found out who he was.
Oh, wow.
and arrested him. And he's been jailed since. Pretty sad. But another way is
they can just trump up any charges on you that they want. I mean,
yeah, well, he's like the big one, it's just you got to get rid of him,
right.
But the other side of things is you can use VPNs from China, get to the other side of the wall, and you can just freely watch YouTube, go on Twitter and things like that. But I noticed a lot of people use Twitter to read like negative information, or even to still read Chinese propaganda even after they scale the wall. which is pretty sad.
That is sad.
But actually, many other people still get access to free information outside of it. So it's very hard for the CCP to control this completely, simply because today's technology, right? It's really like it's a battle. You always have one side upping the other side, and so it's just whoever wins the technological race. And I think final point is, today people are less scared about the regime than it was maybe 10 years ago. I think that's why a lot of people say China's a paper tiger now, the CCP. But people, like you said, the desire for freedom is much bigger than wanting to be caged in, especially when it comes to information. So even I think that little risk that they take, it's worth it in their view.
I see. Now, Hong Kong was a British leased area for what was 99 years. And then they had to give it back in, I believe it was 1999, to China. Now, obviously, the people of Hong Kong were very distraught that the Chinese Communist Party would now take possession over that. How has that fared over the past, 20 years now, 24 years? And what's become of Hong Kong since?
Basically, the story of Hong Kong is summarized in one sentence, which is never to give an inch to the Communist Party. Because when you do, what happened with Hong Kong was a group of people thought, we have this massive regime, we can't ever compete or fight against it, but let's just give them what they want. At first, of course, they only asked for a little, but then inch by inch, they keep asking for more. Mm-hmm. It's the bully mentality, which is they prey on the weak mindset, right? So over time, Hong Kong slowly got more and more pro-China, not because they wanted to, but because it was slowly being infiltrated because people were scared. And so by the time 2010, 2014 rolled around, there was protests because at this point people had realized, oh my God, things are changing in Hong Kong. 2019, obviously, we saw those massive protests and the enactment of the national security law. Since 2020, Hong Kong has completely fallen in the sense that it's no different than a regular city in China anymore. What once was known as the jewel of Asia, this massive economic powerhouse,
Hmm.
is no more. Really, Hong Kong today is just a regular Chinese city, and you have replacement like Singapore in place for Hong Kong, and it's a really sad story because no, okay, this propaganda point they always say, right? Under British rule, it's like you have a foreign colonialism or imperialism, whatever, in place in China. But think about now, if Hong Kong was still under British rule, people there would be able to speak freely. Apple Daily, all these press would still be there. You have freedom, but that's no longer there under the CCP.
Now, Hong Kong is an interesting case because it's probably one of the better examples of free market economics to actually use as an example. So Hong Kong doesn't really have a lot of place. It doesn't have a lot of space. It's not a big area. There's not a ton of resources. Their main resource is that their location is great, and there was low taxes, like just historically low taxes. You could go there, exchange goods with other people from other places of the world, and not have to deal with tariffs. Like that if that's not a better case for free market economics, I don't know what else is. And as soon as that environment's gone, all the equity in that is gone with it. So then people move over to places like Singapore, like you were saying, and then that becomes the thing. So I think that's again another good example. Now moving over to and you don't have to give me the whole history of Taiwan. I mean, it's a big history, but just so the audience can understand a brief history of what's going on there, why China thinks it's part of China, why Taiwan considers themselves the real China, and why there's a contention and why there's worries that China will invade Taiwan.
Right. So you could sit here and debate with a historic, professor from China about this legitimacy issue for days, but I'll keep it simple. Basically, the contemporary issue is since 1949, there's a there was a civil war that led to the defeat of the KMT, which is the Nationalist Party. They left to Taiwan. Since then, the CCP has been wanting to defeat the KMT or the Nationalist Party, which is on Taiwan, and then take over Taiwan in what they call is a unification or reunification of China. But the thing is, the CCP loves to use this historical period to justify their attempt to take the island militarily or use some sort of infiltration method to try to get the government to, much like Hong Kong, to reincorporate itself into China. But today, the issue is people born on the island of Taiwan, they don't have a lot of association with mainland. The example is people in Singapore speak Chinese as well, but they're Singaporeans. A lot of Taiwanese people today don't think they're Chinese people. They think they're Taiwanese people. The latest election, which saw the Democratic Progressive Party take on another 4 years, is a great example of this difference in how people view their identity shifting. Just like how Canadians don't say we're British residents in Canada.
No.
Right? It's Canadian. It's a new identity. Of course, there's the British history behind it. So why does China want Taiwan? The number one issue is there is a legitimacy issue for the existence of the CCP, because the very idea of Taiwan calls into the question of why the CCP needs to exist. You have an island, 23 million people living in a free democratic society, able to exercise their voting rights, speak freely. And then you see what's happening across the strait, right? In China, 1.4 billion people unable to have any of the rights I just mentioned. Rubber stamp voting, dictatorship, censorship, all of these things. So if the CCP cannot stamp out Taiwan, it cannot legitimately say that it is the right way, so to speak, for Chinese people, right? Because there's a whole argument saying that Asians can't do democracies, or that Chinese people must have dictatorship.
That's
But
that's where the real racism is. That's crazy.
But if you look at Japan, look at South Korea, look at
Totally
Taiwan,
fine.
these are great examples, right? So obviously, there's the whole technological aspect, right? TSMC, and geostrategically, there's the whole first island chain aspect, which is preventing the Chinese military from projecting its power into the greater Pacific Ocean. And so, but the main point for me is the legitimacy issue. And I think that's why, the CCP as a whole, as a party, their understanding is that Taiwan has to go, and one way or another. And Xi has made it his mission to do so in his time. That's at least what he wants to do. Whether or not that actually happened, though, my assessment right now, just based on the current condition of China, I think it's very hard for him to start a war because I don't think the economic situation allows him to. But obviously, things could change. But just given the current trend, I think it's very hard.
Well, let's get into that. The economic situation in China. We're facing a economic. We had a housing bubble in Canada, and it was largely due to low interest rates for so long, bidding up the price of real estate, causing malinvestment, people going into that marketplace, and then you double onto that massive immigration, tremendous amounts of people coming into the country, and you get this giant housing shortage. Push and pull of the prices want to come down, interest rates are going up, but they can't because there's too little supply in the marketplace. So we have our own housing situation, but I understand China has a different housing situation, and for different reasons, even cultural reasons, i.e., men having to own a piece of property just to court a girl. I hear that's an issue. Can you explain China's economic issues right now?
So China has three golden industries versus manufacturing and export. For so long, that's basically their main source of revenue. Domestically, real estate is the big one. So that's the second. Real estate is about 30% of China's overall economy.
And that's a domestic consumption item, correct? That's China's.
Yes.
China's buying, like Chinese citizens are buying up all of this real estate, not foreigners investing there.
Exactly. And so that ties into the third one, which is domestic consumption or spending power. So these three are the golden industries that has propped up China's economy since it started the whole reform and opening up. Now, all three of these are down, severely down, to the point where China has entered deflation, which is, in deflation, basically you have a lot of supply. In this case, in the real estate, for example, there's more than enough buildings to house the entire population of China to live in these apartment complexes, but they still keep building. And nobody's buying them anymore because the real estate price continues to pummel. But nobody's buying because there's an overall lack of confidence in the Chinese government. People are very scared. Savings last year was at an all-time high. I'll just give you an example of how much people were saving. In the first quarter of 2023, the savings goal for the entire China was finished. It was the same amount they had done for the entire year of 2022, was already done in the first quarter of 2023. So people simply just put their money in the bank, and they don't want to spend on things like buying a house, buying bigger items like a car, investing into the stock market, things like that, right? So when you're in deflation, it's very dangerous because what China has been doing for a very long time to try to bail out its large industries is just printing more money. But then now you have a situation where, sure, the people are getting money, but the government wants them to spend it, but they're like, no, we're not going to spend it. We're just going to keep saving it. And so for basically the entire 2023, the CCP has tried to get people to spend money and to try to come up with this idea that the economy is back. Let's spend money, right? Go on vacations, eat out, buy houses, and things like that. And then people are just like, nah, we're just gonna chill. Let's just not do any of those things. And then what happens is in the I think this was 2 days ago at Davos World Economic Forum, the Chinese premier spoke and he says China's GDP is 5.2% growth, right? As he spoke, the across China's stock market, all the indexes just dropped points, like 2%, 3%, 4%. So it's like the market just basically just gave him a big slap across the face and tells him like, no, no, that's not you didn't grow 5.2%. So China's economy, once you, the issue is you mentioned bubbles, right?
Mhm.
The way the Chinese economy works is that the real estate sector is tied to the local economy as well because local governments make money by leasing land to developers. So the more you build, the more houses you put up, the more money the local government has. And then also at the same time, China's heavy on infrastructure constructions. So you see all these beautiful roads, bridges, skylines, right? Huge buildings. That's one point that China always says that about the reputation. You know, they have this beautiful skyline in these beautiful cities. Well, all those you need to pay for them, right? So local governments will finance them, and they actually put so much money into this. But because these are really dead investments, they don't generate any money. Like if you build a bridge, it's not going to make you billions of dollars. What ends up happening is they mount a huge amounts of debt, and these debt are called hidden debt, right? So China has, I believe, according to the IMF, 92 trillion or 82 trillion. I can't remember the exact number, which is still about half that of the US. But we know the things is that nobody's buying China's debt, right? So China's economy is running on a over exertion system where you basically continue to build this bubble. Now, in any sort of economics, whether you believe in communism, socialism, or capitalism, you know that supply and demand like exists still in communism. It's just that they manufacture, they artificially create them, right?
Mhm.
So there is bound to be a breaking point, and many people that are experts on Chinese economy, they do look at the next few years and say that this is really dangerous because how much longer can you go on with all the entire system, like all your consumption's down, all your real estate's down, your export is non-existent, foreign investments, withdrawn completely. How long can you go on for? And so that's really the big question. And so under that context, it's very hard for Xi to do anything over Taiwan.
From what I understand, there's entire cities with nobody living in them. Like there's all of these places they've built up and they've built all this infrastructure, and people either purchase them and don't put anything in them, like don't furnish them, don't put even kitchens, bathrooms, or anything in them because it's for down the road perhaps, or it's just an investment they might want to flip later. This is all speculation that's been built up. Like buy property because it's a thing to do instead of buy property because this is something that you want to consume it. Like it's a whacked out economy. These are the kinds of things like you only see with central authorities or with central bank manipulation, that kind of thing. You wouldn't see that in a organic economy at all.
Yeah, no, it's what the government has done with the developers for real estate for a very long time is they incentivize you buying, and that it's really weird because when you don't have the sense of urgency to buy, you make better choices, right? You research, like you take you a year to look for a house and put a down payment on. But the way that they do it in China is the developers will say, okay, we're going to do this pre-sale campaign. It's going to be a beautiful apartment. You have 3 bedrooms. You have pools, whatever. All these utility amenities. Your utilities are going to be well done. Everything's good, right? but you haven't even seen the apartment up yet. It's just like a plot of land. And they show you a picture, and then they're just like, okay, just trust us on this. Like, trust me, bro. Just give us your money, and then we'll build this for you, right, in like 2 years. And then apparently that's enough. Plus, government propaganda and all these things saying that help contribute to the economy, buy a house, put a down payment. And then what happens during the pandemic was that all these real estate developers, because they've been bailed out for so long, suddenly are racking up billions, hundreds of $1 billion, going bankrupt, defaulting on their payments, realizing that actually this whole time they did not do anything with the money that was meant to build the houses. And so you had a bunch of apartment complexes in China that were unfinished, right? So they simply stopped building it because there's just no money to continue for the construction. And then where did the developers go? Well, billions of dollars are just missing. You wonder where that's been, corruption.
So they
but that's the
fly
story
by
of-
night and then they're gone. See you later.
Yeah.
There's no repercussions.
And then
No one to sue.
next week you see a beautiful beach house in the Bahamas, some Chinese official and their three mistresses are living their life out there.
Oh, wow.
That's where money ends up.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So in China, is there any sort of so in North America we have we have our civil courts, and you take someone to court. You ripped me off. I had a contract. You signed it. I didn't get what I was promised. We had stipulations. What was the recourse for the average person in China?
Well, you mentioned contracts. The fundamental of capitalism is you sign a law-binding document, and that guarantees you, right? China's new contract law basically says any contracts can be, I guess you would call it, invalidated if it violates national security or party reasonings that would offend the party. So basically, China can just say, and you go to the court, they'll be like, I can't do anything because Chinese courts are part of the judicial system, which is overseen by the party. So it's not a separate, independent entity. It's just a part of the party's judicial system. So there's really no independence of the law. But contracts can be easily violated. You go to civil courts. You can do. Lawyers in China, they really can't do much. At the end of the day, everything is up to whatever the judge says. The judge always listens to the party, and so there's really no sense of legality in what we would know as fighting a legal battle.
Now I see why Trudeau Sr. liked Mao so much. He famously wrote the notwithstanding clause to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it seems a lot along those lines. You have all these rights, so long as we don't need to step all over them. That's kind of the issue there. Now, a lot of Canadians will say that was a big mistake, but imagine having that on any document, any contract is a notwithstanding clause that says, well, if it's one of our friends, yeah, that contract's no longer valid. You don't have a leg to stand on here, and this is why I keep stressing this, and I say that nowadays the fight that we're fighting it's a global fight. We're all global citizens if you look at it that way. Most people can do business with other countries. You can communicate with people in any country. I think the days of thinking that we're in this, like, we're in closed little bubbles is over. I mean, we all have our nationalities, we all have our countries of origin, we all have that, but we can do business wherever we'd like, even in backwards totalitarian government places like China. But the big crux of this, and I think the big battle moving forward, and a lot of people don't know how to define it really, is that there's a real argument to be made that there's two fundamental ideologies at play here. There's the one that at the core of it believes in property rights and believes in people's ability to maintain those property rights and government contracts that will maintain those property rights. And then there's the other school of thought where, no, there's a collective good, and your property, you don't have a really right to it at the end of the day. and there could be some collective good where we need to take it from you. Um, it always starts off with the great idea that it will always be for the greater good, but it's often corrupt in it, and it's for somebody's personal good, and that's usually how it rolls. But I feel that like the planet at this time ideologically is caught between this rock and hard place, these two competing ideologies, and one always inevitably goes to some sort of form of totalitarianism, and then the other one is the slow crawl to totalitarianism that you have to keep fighting off in order to keep your freedom, and we're currently in that fight right now in the Western world. Now, China is part of that entity that's creeping in, and we've been noticing that here in Canada. We've been hearing lots about the interference in our election, certain politicians being, there was 11 of them apparently named to CSIS. The prime minister knows who they are, won't give out that information of who they are, but 11 of them were compromised and are part of the 338 sitting in our House of Parliament at the moment. And then, we have all these stories like the accusations against Han Dong, sitting a politician in Parliament, who's being accused of, in the last election, communicating with officials in China to keep political prisoners behind bars, because if they were to be released, it would look good for the other party who's running against him. And of course, that's an allegation. I'm not making the allegation. That was brought forward by journalists at, I believe it was the Globe and Mail. But this is a big problem in Canada. What is China up to? they're getting into our what's the goal, in your opinion, of what they're trying to do in Canada?
It's always been every country, like particularly the U.S., Canada, European countries. Even I think there was a story about Liz Truss, the short-lived prime minister. She was secretly behind her whole China hawk image, apparently trying to get one of the district's company to export weapons or something to China. So you wonder, how deep is this? The main goal here is to control the narrative and perception about China around the world. They've been very successful at this, even I think pre-2016. I fundamentally think that Trump changed that. And to some degree, now Biden has continued some, at least in the US. In Canada, what I've observed is there's a much less awareness of grassroots organizations that are pro-China, because China's not going to send one of their own spies or something to be like, hey, you want to, you're a sitting member of the House of Commons, you want to do some stuff about China.
No, they're busy dating Swalwell in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. So they would send in like somebody who is a Canadian, perhaps, and they would do these engagements. It's called a Unite Front department that specifically is tasked to do this. So the goal here is to co-opt the organizations in Canada to influence these politicians, in some cases even through monetary bribes, other means. You always hear about this kind of story. I remember I was told the story of like these officials from, I won't say which country, but they were invited to China for like a week tour. They were given, girls, food, tours, just a luxury experience, which then they carried back to their home country, and it turned into, hey, maybe China's not so bad. Let's, help them out and things like that.
Oh,
so
wow, okay.
the main goal is to basically change the perception of that country's view of China to the benefit of allowing China to do things on the world stage.
I think they're dancing with the devil when they're doing that. Absolutely. Canadians, there's a lot of Canadians that are worried that China is trying to influence or infiltrate Canada. And then, there's always, I hear it on social media. I gotta, tell people to chill out a little bit, like land invasion from China. Like this is the stuff that's going to happen. That's obviously not very likely. What's the likelihood of a land invasion from China?
The I, I think if China were to actually invade Canada, I think the world will be already much different than what we're seeing now. Because the idea. So here's what China actually wants to do, right, with their military. First, they want to take Taiwan. Once they take Taiwan, they can basically sort of block off the South China Sea, the Eastern China Sea. So countries like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, they are all going to be under this power projection sphere of China, which means that they're very likely to either try to resist and potentially having to fight China, or basically listen to what China says. Then China's going to continue to grow their military to the point where they can sway at least half of the Pacific Ocean to say that this is our half, and to the point where they can match the United States in um, I guess, military power projection.
Mm.
But by that point, even if Canada and the United States were to not be invaded, China would be at a position which they're no longer bound by the restrictions of the ocean and all that. So at that point, it's already quite scary, because maybe the last stand is North America while the rest of the world falls to China. I don't think Canada and the United States want to be in that position to begin with. So it's very important to stop China at its first step, which is to stop the invasion of Taiwan.
And well, I mean, it's the moral thing to do. If
Yeah.
if people have an independent state and they don't want to be invaded, I think it would be the moral thing to at least stand up for them, like we did in other situations in Europe in the 1940s,
Yeah.
for example. I mean,
I was
oh, go ahead.
so I went to the Netherlands last year, and World War II Canadians fought to liberate Holland, and the people in the Netherlands are very appreciative of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Canadians are not known to shy away from. We might not have the biggest military, but it's the effort that has contributed to keeping the peace around the world. I think that to a lot of people is Canadians especially. I think it's very important. I heard from this is from an American general. He says that the U.S. hates a bully. That whenever there's somebody who is out there trying to do something to cause harm to others, the U.S. will step up. And I'd say Canadians are along that line as well. Usually now in modern times, stepping along the line with the United States and others. So I think this, like you said, Clyde, is a global situation. So we shouldn't think that in Canada we can somehow get away with it by just participating in this, because it actually is an interest, I think, that matter to everyone around the world, not just to the U.S. or Taiwan or who not. There's shipping interests, there's economic, technological interests. A lot of that is interest for Canada as well.
That's the thing. So, like, we had the Cold War, and that was the war against the communist ideology, and the interesting thing to look at with that is that we called it over when the Soviet Union fell, but the communist regime didn't stop in the Soviet Union. It continued on in China, and we've been having a Cold War ever since, really. And we've been giving up a lot of our things. We've had politicians kind of selling us up Schitt's Creek to China for decades and decades. I know the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a big part of that for a long time. I remember people on both sides of the aisle saying, "This is a bad idea. What are we doing?" And I think that all ended with Trump. That was kind of another good thing about Trump. We were talking about the goods and the bads about Trump earlier in the show, but I think that was definitely a good. Now it's funny because I talk about globalism, but like, we are part of a global society in so much that we trade with each other, and I think trade is a great way of being able to communicate with other countries if we can trade freely amongst each other. It's these these free trade agreements. They're not very free in trade at all. NAFTA and the national the FTAA that came afterwards, and then the Trans-Pacific Partnership. These are all really bad ideas for the average Joe, average business owner, that kind of thing. It's like a really a conglomerate thing that benefits mostly just big players. But yeah, actually, absolutely, it's a big thing. Economically, to want to trade with China, but also be very cautious of what they're doing strategically in the world, and what kind of plays they're trying to play out in the long run, because it's really not working out in our benefit what we've been doing. But at the same time, China's hurting. So how has this been working out? Because this is a, like, the narrative kind of pops for me. People are telling me China's a big bad guy. They're growing. They're going to be a superpower. And then I'm also hearing that China's economy is in the tanks. They can't keep their government together. They're having a hard time even having their police state. Police states cost too much money. They'll never be able to afford to do this. So which direction is it actually going in? Is it bound for collapse, or is it a superpower in the waiting?
I think it's bound for collapse. It's very simply, if you look at like this, right? Um, so what I mentioned about the economy a while ago, that was all just kind of the objective reasons. But subjectively, I personally think there's a big the reason why the CCP was able to sustain its power is because people are scared of it, right? They kill people, they persecute religious groups, they attack humanity. Um, but what they're really scared of is actually truth. You find this with any attempts with like socialism around the world. Is the first thing they do is they hide the truth, right? You talk with a socialist, you they ignore the truth, or
Well,
they
they'll tell
pretend
you
like
you're
it
not
doesn't.
allowed to talk about that. You're not allowed to talk about
Exactly.
this or
Yeah.
that, and they shut you down.
Exactly. Yeah. So the that's why I say the best way for China to resist or to revolutionize isn't through a violent means. It's through understanding the truth. Because once you do, and more people, I'm actually grateful for the internet and all this information availability today. Because once you know the truth, you no longer believe in the cause of the government, and you see that today with the younger people in China. They just simply decided that we're not going to do anything to contribute to your cause because we know your cause was built on a system of lie and it doesn't benefit me. And so once you realize that, and so that's, I think, will also push to a lot of the economic issues to surface. Um, so going to the question here, China always wants to appear like they're the big bad guys, this massive monster from the east. But every time they do, Xi Jinping has done something that caused it to backfire. For example, the economy is bad, right? Instead of just letting it be, letting the market sort itself out, Xi says the opposite. Xi Jinping goes, "We're going to put up 200 regulations for the private industry." That's clearly going to help us get the economy back on running. And then the market doesn't respond the way that he wants to be, because obviously the more control you have, the worse it becomes.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
but
The
so
regulation is what causes the economy to stifle. So if they regulate the market, it becomes less economical for people to. I mean, it already costs a lot of money to ship products, like raw products, over to China across the sea, and then for them to manufacture it cheaply and then send it back. So I mean, if it costs more money to make the stuff, people will stop shipping it over and shipping it back. Like, that's really at the end of the day. And a lot of people are going to other countries. They're going to India. They're going to parts of Africa to have this stuff made, and they're building up industry in these other areas. The one thing that was the big economic driver, which was cheap labor,
yeah,
is no longer a thing in China unless they crack down on their people again. Do you think that the people have the wherewithal to deal with another crackdown on and a lowering of their living standards?
the interesting thing is, um, so everybody thought that, living in the Mao's period, right? Like you didn't have your own place, your property, you ate at communes, you work in farms and stuff. That people were going to be satisfied by moving towards this like new society where they get to live in luxury homes, drive cars, and all of that. Right? But then what I've noticed now is today, when you take that away, again, people start to blame you, right? It's very simple. It's like if you give somebody candy for 40 years and then you suddenly say, okay, we're not going to give you candy anymore. They're going to be like really angry about this, right?
Where's my
And
candy?
so
Yeah.
now you see all this anger about Xi Jinping because people think that he's the one that took away all the candy. Uh, but I think that's just the natural way of communism because I mean you're not supposed to taste the candy in communism. You're supposed to have own nothing and be happy about it. So she's actually walking it back to the this purebred communism idea. Uh, what really took place in that 40 years of the reform and opening up, it's over. It was a dream period, so to speak, to like I said, to uh, make sure that people in China don't think about this political stuff, right? Um, but Xi Jinping came in 2012, and he's like, forget about that. We're gonna do Mao stuff again because I think that's you're taking this too far. This reform and opening up. We gotta go back to Mao.
Well,
So
that's the worst thing that could happen.
yeah, but the question you asked, Clyde, it's are people going to put up with that? I don't think people are putting up with it today. But the only thing is they can't openly criticize it. They're just doing it silently. But everybody's talking about hating on CP today, like among themselves, obviously, even posting online sometimes. So I think once you take that candy away, people are going to be very mad.
So it's interesting. Like the Soviet Union fell apart because they stretched themselves too thin and they couldn't police it anymore. People grew cynical about the fact that people would say they pretend to regulate us and we pretend to be regulated, right? It's they didn't care anymore. It became a joke, and the black market soon became the gray market, which soon became the okay, we're not going to go after you, just trade, and then that was the inevitable doom of it. It all just kind of fell apart once they stopped being able to finance it. Does China look like it's going in that direction, or do you see the collapse of the Chinese communism going in a different direction? And do you see the light at the end of the tunnel? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel for China?
Yes, I do think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. What I think, so the lesson from the Soviet Union for the CCP was to never abandon the ideological side of things, even if you give up the market side of things, right? So, no, I just mentioned under the reform and opening up, they were loose and relaxed on the economic stuff, but the ideological stuff was still very much intact, right? That's really what led to 1989 because people thought they also were relaxing the ideology, but clearly not.
They
They
were not.
killed
Yeah.
protesters instead. But with the way that I see how the CCP will collapse is I think at this point, because Xi Jinping has concentrated so much power and he has amassed so much control under himself, the only way is if he somehow dies or that he's removed from power, that there is a change in the system. I don't see that there's going to be a violent revolution that takes place, much like how the Soviet Union kind of, at the end of the day, it was it kind of just destroyed itself. Obviously, there's a lot of factors, right? There's the Cold War, there's that, but the economy is a big one. But I don't see it happening purely from an economic way. Uh, but I do think that it still comes from within the party. And I think that 20 years ago, people weren't ready, and the Chinese people weren't ready because there was that reliance aspect they had built.
Mhm.
But today, because there's no longer that reliance on the CCP, I think people are completely ready for a change. So I think Chinese people talk about this three elements of change, right? There has to be divine timing. There has to be this on the ground event, and then there has to be people's harmony in the ways of. So all three elements has to come into one place for this change to happen. And so, I mean, the Chinese history, if you read through any of it, it's like at the end of a dynasty, just you see the most bizarre and chaotic. Many people say this is like the end of the Qing dynasty. It's just the most bizarre stuff happening in China. So I talk a lot about the weird stuff happening in Chinese society. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like that. I think so. I see this happening quite quickly. I'm not going to put a number down. People are going to be
You
like,
can't predict
David,
these things
you
now.
said 5 years and didn't come by or something like that. But yeah, I think it's very quick.
But with G, I mean, he's in an unprecedented third term.
Mhm.
This is a thing. Even though it's communism, there's no choice. Apparently, there's elections and terms, but he's in an unprecedented third term. He seems to be even more dictatorial than anyone since Mao, and he wants to be the next Mao. Character like this, don't you think he would supernova in that scenario if he's losing his power and he feels like it's going to be lost? That he would use all of his resources to lash out some way. What do you think might happen there?
The interesting thing I noticed about whether the Stalin or Mao was that until they died, the period of terror really never ended. Right. I think that that's also the same that's going to apply to Xi. In fact, even though we say that this is unprecedented in a third term, really every CCP leader they've ruled for life until their death. For example, Mao was in power basically, and the Cultural Revolution was in place until he died in 1976. Deng, after him, was basically still in power even after he sort of resigned uh, for until I think 93, and then Jiang after as well. For even after his 10 years, he still held on to his military power position, and then so on. So I I always say, sure, Xi Jinping is in a third term, perhaps even a fourth term, and I just say that we should look at the way that he's running the country, like you mentioned, like Mao. So I think we should look to his death as the end point for his thing. I don't know if he's going to do a supernova because, in my view, right now, this inside the party, there's a growing opposition. Everybody's afraid of him, and everybody is looking for some ways to not get into his like circle. Um, so to avoid being purged, right? He's purged like
Mm.
20, 30 generals already, and then many officials. So I think
That's not
there's
a good
a
sign of a leader to
it's
be.
not a good sign.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's actually a sign of instability in a way. It's
Hmm.
like stability on the outside, but really instability on the inside. Uh, so I think until his death, there will be a lot of turmoil. But I don't see a supernova, so to speak, moment where he kills millions of people. Not today, I don't think.
But you say about how unstable he is, and I would even go to say to paranoid at that point if he's
Mm.
purging so many people. That could explain a lot of why he's put out satellite police stations across the world to police Chinese expats, like nationals that have left China to live elsewhere. I mean, we have this happening in Canada. I can't speak to other countries where this is taking place, but I've been covering it for what's been happening in Canada. And we've been hearing reports of these illegal police stations where they have CCP members that have been literally knocking on people's doors and intimidating them, telling them that you have to go back to face charges, or else we're gonna go after your family that's still in China. This kind of thing. Can you tell me anything about that?
Yeah. So the nature of the police station is they're not technically police officers, but they carry out the orders of Chinese government which is very interesting, right? Because they're operating on what is the sovereignty of that particular country. So in the case of Canada, yet they can do this for a very long time. So it goes back to my argument that there's a huge coercive reliance factor. Sorry, in that they know that by creating reliance, like you have family back home, uh, you're gonna listen to what I want you to do. So they've done this. They've basically turned people into involuntary spies for the government because they say that if you want to continue to have your family be safe in China, you got to do this for me. Uh, they're connected with the local organizations, so they do counter protests, right? They do, if there's like a, say, a demonstration for some peace movement in China, you'll see the other side with the banners with the Chinese flags supporting. You saw this in San
It's put
Francisco.
on by these groups.
Yep, you saw the mass mobilization. You see all these people with the flags and stuff.
So I
A
take
lot of it is done there.
strong exception to this, because if anybody comes to Canada fleeing a country like China because they want to escape it and they want to get out of it, and then we have government officials that do nothing about this kind of activity taking place on our own soil. We should be doing everything to protect these individuals. If you want to come to Canada and become Canadian, you are a Canadian. Like there's no like, well, he's Chinese, so there's no gray area for me. If you came here to escape that, there is no place for CCP members to come and intimidate any Canadian citizen, any Canadian person here, and to see that they've been just kind of allowed to exist, allowed to operate under the radar, even though this is all being picked up by CSIS, our intelligence services, all of this, but yet we have a government who, the allegations are that they've been infiltrated themselves, are allowing for this to take place. Now, this is horrendous. This is, it's beyond the pale. It's a foreign government operating on your own, on somebody else's soil. Like, what is the, because you speak to more Chinese people, more Chinese expats, nationals. What's the going consensus on how this is taking place?
Because I'm in the U.S. now, so I'll just speak to what I know about the first case, right, which was the one in Manhattan,
Okay.
the police station. The reason why, particularly in New York, this can thrive, this police station, is because a lot of the Chinese immigrants, they come to the U.S., right? They don't incorporate themselves into the general society. They sort of stay together with the Chinese immigrants, still maintaining a lot of that like mainland China identity, speaking Chinese, living in like Chinatown, these type of place. They need a lot of help, and that's when these police stations, they will prey on them because they rely on them to do things like passport service, ID service, and then even things like connecting back home to their bank accounts, banking, and
Are
all
you
these things.
talking the official embassies are doing this?
No, the police station.
Because the
Because
embassy would be taking care of your passport and stuff. Are they? I'm confused on that.
so a lot of these police stations are tied to a province back in China. For example, the one in Manhattan is tied to the Fujian province. So they're very specific with a part of a China, which in China, the police station for that particular area is the liaison office, or sorry, the one in Manhattan is the liaison office of the police station in China. So when they're basically trying to handle their own district's people living in overseas, but that's not the only role that they play. The role they also play is they do like harassments of and counter protests. They work with the embassy, they do much more than that, right? They harass people, they try to silence dissidents, all of these things. But the base for them doing that is there's a group of people that need them to help establish all these things because they're connected back home. Um, but I was talking to people in the Chinese immigration circle there in New York. They're tied to a lot of things. Like there's like assassination, high profile coercion, infiltration, particularly into the local groups and things like that. They all have traces back to this police station.
That's awful. That's absolutely awful.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are the stories that get buried. There's not a lot of talk about them in mainstream media. These are the kind of stories I want to, because when you hear this stuff, this is where a lot of animosity comes from between you want to say ethnic groups, but national groups. My wife's Japanese, so I know full well that there's a Japanese community. Anytime that there's a group that comes from another nation, you get together with other people. I lived in Japan for a while. I got to know all the other white guys. You know what I mean? It's just a thing. You kind of see each other, like, hey, but you speak English. So it is a thing. It's hard not to gravitate towards like individuals and become part of those communities. And then day-to-day life, it's hard. It's easier to just talk your native tongue than it is to do. I get that. It creates animosity, but then it also breeds this kind of exploitative behavior from bad individuals, obviously Chinese officials that are behaving bad, and they're exploiting this kind of thing. And I don't know what else to say to it other than to encourage people to try their best to get out of these enclaves. If you go to another country to live your life, and you find yourself hanging around with mostly people of your ethnic origin, try to get out, branch out, and communicate with the larger society. It'd probably do you wonders, and you might not get exploited by groups like this. But is there anything else you wanted to add? Because this is I mean, I could keep talking to you for probably hours about all of this stuff because it's interesting to me, and I only have so much information. You obviously have so much more knowledge on this stuff, but I want to encourage people to go over the website, over to your YouTube channel, because it's funny. It's such a serious conversation that we're having here, but you bring a lot more humor to these stories on your channel, and that's what gravitated me towards you. I like the way you present the stuff. It's not always so like, wow, this is horrible. There's a lot of humor to it. There's a lot of fun. You do amazing shorts, and you do them quite frequently. So I definitely want to encourage people to go over there. But before we end the live stream, because we are running out of time here, is there anything else you wanted to add for the audience, for people that are just getting into this whole side of looking at China, separating it between Communist Party, Chinese people, and relationships around the world kind of thing?
I would say at this point, just come and enjoy the wild ride we have. Like you said, I sometimes it's even bizarre to me what I have to speak out of my mouth about what's happening in China. The latest one I did was they were doing like a competition with a tourism in China, just a bunch of bizarre stuff. Anyways, I just want to say, it's a fun topic because you get to learn the complexity of another side of the world. At the same time, I'm learning a lot of my own heritage as well. At the same time, learning about the politics side of things. So if that interests you, come check out my channel. And yeah, but I appreciate this opportunity with Clyde and to come and chat with you about this. So appreciate that.
Absolutely.